Okay.
Good evening and welcome to the November edition of the Poetry Playhouse series. There will be no reading in December because we'll be traveling, but we'll be back in January and February, last Tuesday. This year we are we're highlighting New Mexico presses and anthologies. And we're very pleased to have the editor and two of the authors from an Albuquerque-based press, Coyote Arts. And we're going to start with a little conversation with the editor, Jordan Jones. Jordan and Leslie Stallhood are the co-owners of Coyote Arts. And I'll just give a few words from Jordan's very impressive bio. He's a writer, publisher, genealogist who lives in Albuquerque. He studied in France, received a degree there in 1989, Angers, France. Earned an MA in English from UC Davis with Gary Snyder and others on his thesis committee. He's been published widely, author of two books, Sand and Coal Poems and The Wheel Poems. He's also past president of the National Genealogical Society and currently president of the New Mexico Book Association. And I would like to welcome Jordan and have a little conversation if we could. So, yeah. So, hi. I should mention that we met probably last spring when Jordan came to one of our back porch readings. We were in the good weather. We were having people like Art Good Times. Read from our back patio, and then Jordan came several times to those, and we got to chatting, and it seemed like a good idea to have a feature on Coyote Arts Press, which, as I understand, does nonfiction, fiction, and poetry titles. So I wonder if you could just tell us for a few minutes about how it started, when it started, and what the mission, what the goals are for Coyote Arts.
Sure. So I've been doing book and magazine editing and publishing for more than 35 years, which is kind of scary when I think about it, but it's true. And then when I moved to Albuquerque, which was in 2019, I started thinking about starting that up again, and coming to Albuquerque was kind of pretty much claiming my time from my corporate overlords, and one of the things I wanted to do at that time was to get back into publishing and promoting work by people whose work I admire. So I started that up, and actually the first book that I did was Lawrence's book Goodbye Ice. And so I've done about 8 books so far. It's been a little bit of a slow start. My plan is to get up to about 12 books a year. I don't know that I'll do that next year, but that's where I'm trying to get to and have that as kind of a steady state.
Just 1 second. Somebody was having trouble with sound, but I think that probably is just, I'm hearing you fine. So okay, keep going. Yeah.
So primarily what I'm looking for and looking at and wanting to promote are books that have a lot of compassion. So human and also transhuman compassion is how I think of it. And so there are a lot of poems and poets and works that I'm bringing to the fore that are environmental in nature. And both of the poets that I brought to you tonight, Lawrence and Eric, are poets with a lot to say about the environment. In the case of Lawrence's book, he's got a book about the disappearing ice in the Arctic, which he knows quite a bit about. And we'll talk about that later. And Eric's book is selected poems from his life around the Pacific Rim. He's lived in California and Hawaii and Japan and so forth, and he's written about those things. A lot of it is about the environment and how that is changing and how that is affected by stupid things humans do. So I don't know what else to say aside from that, but I thought I might read a couple poems that would give people a sense of my own aesthetic.
That's
So I've got a
terrific.
couple of
Good.
Okay. So the first one I'm going to read is called Zen Baker. He who bakes bread shall know grain by touch, and blood of fiber shall expand his heart as he leans to knead. Dough, secret and liquid, shall rise toward the hot stoves of his hands, teaching him to breathe, press and pull a loaf into shape from within as he dances without. He shall hide behind his apron a belly of knowledge, rounded alike by deep brown successes and burnt failures.
Yeah, very nice. Yeah.
Yeah. And another one is called Sanborn Park. This is about a place in the foothills just to the west of San Jose, California. Sanborn Park. Pale green leaves underfoot, maroon of madrone, ochre of tan oak on the trail. Hundreds of small, slippery poems the trees address to the leisure of summer soil. Decaying leaves nourish wildness in the terrain coyote inhabits, just outside the circular edge of the urban.
I wanted to ask you about the choosing Coyote Arts for your title. Yeah. Is that something you came up with after moving to New Mexico, or was that something in the back of your mind?
Well, one of my previous presses was called Leaping Dog, and that really came out of I wanted to celebrate coyote and in all the different guises of trickster and totem and all of these things. And also, I was publishing at that point in California. Has a similar Western aesthetic and background. So I was celebrating that. And when I kicked it off again, I didn't want to use the same name. I wanted it to be a new press and do some new things. And so I just thought it made sense, even more so here in Albuquerque.
And I guess, do you find living here affects your aesthetic in any way, or informs either your own writing or what you're looking at in terms of publishing?
It definitely affects my aesthetic just because it affects my mood. The most recent previous place I lived was North Carolina, and it wasn't for me. I'll just say that. And you had like 2 or 3 weeks where it wasn't too hot and humid, and 2 or 3 weeks when it wasn't too cold and humid, and the rest of the year was either too hot or too cold and humid. And here I feel like I can get out more, and there's less time of the year where I just don't want to go outside. So yeah, it affects that, and it is a place where you can really see in our kind of cosmic drought that we're in, you can see the effects of global warming happening all the time, and you can see what we need to address.
And I guess I was maybe you could talk about where you see the press going a little bit, and how many books approximately do you do a year, and do you open things for submission? Do you work more informally in terms of asking people for manuscripts?
So up to this point, I've done things more informally. I have received some manuscripts here and there over the transom, just in the PO box and so forth. I've got most of the books for next year planned, even if I do as much as I'm thinking I might do, which is about a dozen. Some of those are republications, and I'm republishing a book of Eric Shaffer's in early next year, because that shouldn't be out of print. So I am always looking for things, but at the moment, anything I got would be 2025 at the earliest, probably. There'll be several different focuses. Obviously, there's quite a bit of environmental stuff, as we've been discussing. I've also got things that are kind of avant-garde and that fit into the category of the weird, which is like a subcategory of sci-fi. And I've got some mystery novels. I've got actually a couple of books of plays, one that's come out and another that I'm going to bring out. So a variety of things.
Good. Well, yeah, and I urge people to go to coyotearts.com and check that out. Would you like to read a couple more poems for us, maybe?
I want to get to the other guys, because
Okay.
I wanted them
yeah.
to be the focus.
Well, that's fine. And I will let you do the introductions for Eric and Ryan.
Thanks. I'll pop in here. Thanks, Jordan. And I was just also wondering, what is the arts when you call it Coyote Arts? I know you have a lot of different genres, but
yeah. So some of the books, and I've got a book that I'm bringing out as a reprint of a previous book that's gone out of print. That has it's a book of art and literary criticism, and so it's got artworks reproduced and discussed at quite a length by a guy named Eric Bazzo, who lamentably died in 2019. And I'm looking at doing more books that have artwork in them or around them. One of the books of short stories I did has some art in it as well. So.
Somebody needs to mute. I was also thinking of Coyote Arts in terms of the arts of the coyote, the magical arts of the coyote in myth. Yeah,
that makes sense.
Yeah,
I like things where even though I didn't think of that, it works. So.
Yeah. Okay. So you can do the introductions. Yeah.
All right, so the first person I'm going to bring up is Eric Paul Shaffer. He's the author of 7 books of poetry. More than 600 of his poems have been published in the US, Australia, Canada, Costa Rica, England, Germany, India, Ireland, Iran, Japan, Netherlands, New Zealand, Nicaragua. Guy gets around. Scotland, Singapore, and Wales. A few have been translated into important languages like Esperanto, but also Farsi and Spanish. He's published a novel, 2 fiction chapbooks, and a volume of criticism. He lives on Oahu, and he's on this Zoom from his house in Oahu. And he teaches composition, literature, and creative writing at Honolulu Community College. And then previously, with Leaping Dog Press, I published 3 of his books of poems, his novel and chapbook. And I'm now pleased to have Green Leaves selected a new poems that just came out this month, and forthcoming republication of $1 Million Bill. So, Eric?
Thank you. Thank you very much. Well, just between us, in poems, I think what we think we're doing is telling the truth. Question is, how much do we want to tell? Neither we nor the readers nor even the courts want the whole truth, no matter what we say. Good gifts come in small packages, so I'll let fly mainly short poems today, especially since short is only a small challenge. And even when the point is as sharp on an arrow as on the longer shaft of a spear, here are a few truths short enough to share. Apparently, I look like someone everyone knows. People hail and wave across the street. I wave back. I'm not proud. Some approach me speaking in tongues I cannot speak. I apologize that their words are not mine, and they apologize too. I'm sorry, I thought you were the same as I am. I am, usually, pleased with being recognized as someone familiar. Anyone looking closely enough will see the resemblance. That's my poem, Recognition. And you can find those lines on page 41. In a perfect world, every one of my readings would begin exactly that way. Words first and full speed ahead. Veronica, my wonderful wife, loves those mornings I wake mumbling to myself and then run to my desk because she knows a poem will emerge from all that fuss. I woke one morning with these words: the man who lost his middle finger. Oh, I'm on the wrong page. Hang on a second while I find what I'm looking for. Here we are. The man who lost his middle finger didn't think much about the empty space between his wedding ring and the finger he used to point out his wife's flaws. He saved little time in clipping only 9 nails, and he wasted even more dealing with that one ass at every party who finally drank enough to ask. His loss did not make him compassionate toward others who lost cats or kids or countries as their lives stripped them daily of their dignity and their delusions. His patience wore thinnest in the ordinary faded fabric of typical encounters with other drivers on the highways and boulevards he sped. And when they were stupid, as he so often thought they were, he just used the other hand. Okay, class, turn to page 95. Sorry, still in teaching mode. Oh, all right. Though this poem seems a little long, the word count is only 12 words longer than The Man Who Lost His Middle Finger. I think the unexpected weight results from end-stopped lines, sequential self-contained couplets, and the significance and solemnity of the occasion. In fact, this poem consists of 137, I hope, well-chosen words composed for and addressed to every newborn human. Welcome to the planet. This day we welcome you. We teach our ways to greet you. We are one kind among many the world encircles. Touch all gently. Our people are near us always. Find yourself among the best. Cities display our inventions and designs. Watch, wonder, and wander away. Highways are dark and long, concrete and crowded. Make your own way. Birds and beasts bring news of the planet. Good news for your ears only. The sea foretells the past and future. Live now. Soil is the source of the great and the humble. See the small creatures close. Mountains reveal nothing lasts. Make peace with this. Rivers flow in the direction of days. Mark the many courses well. Woods are where the world breathes. Breathe deeply. We greet you as your way begins. Welcome to the planet. Welcome home. One of my favorite things about living in Kula was the constant presence of mockingbirds, one of my favorite birds. The song of the mockingbird demands immediate attention, and I always provide that immediately. Mozart and the Mockingbird. This morning, I turned down Mozart to listen to a mockingbird perched on a wire outside my window. Poor Mozart. Dead, he was much the worse for comparison. But as soon as I lowered the music, the mockingbird flew. He had been listening to Mozart. Another wonder of living up country, especially in Maui, is that every day the sun rose from behind the volcano and set in the sea. In the islands, light is everything. Illumination. On those cold, clear winter mornings, I rise in the dark and sit beneath a lamp with a pen and paper in a circle of light barely bright enough for the work. The window beside me is black and blank, and soon I'm staring only through the window of the page at whatever I'm drawing from ink and concentration. Hours pass, and always when I least expect it, there's a sudden tide of light as the sun crests the mountain. When the first rays flood the fields, the thin yellow curtain behind me brightens, and the room swells with light. Everything is suddenly golden and illuminated. And for just that one moment, I make the glorious and forgivable mistake of thinking it has something to do with me. The devastation of Lahaina by wildfire on August 8th of this year is impossible for anyone in the islands and maybe the rest of the world to overlook. As a former resident of Maui, I'm deeply angered by the combination of lack of foresight, planning, communication, and emergency services that made this conflagration so costly in lives. The loss is raw and fresh and will be for many years. So let me tell you about Lahaina. Due to the excellent access to whale migration routes and unusually calm waters in the bay, Lahaina was the first major port in the Hawaiian Islands for European profiteers ransacking the planet with foreign state and religious support. In fact, Lahaina was the first capital of the Kingdom of Hawaii from 1820. However, by that year, more than 400,000 of the approximately 700,000 Hawaiians alive in 1780 had died of diseases brought by Europeans. But Lahaina was the hub of the thriving whaling industry for decades. Living in the tropics means that twice in a tropical year, the sun passes directly through the zenith overhead. So in 1990, when the Bishop Museum Planetarium chose a term to designate that one moment, the committee chose Lahaina Noon to commemorate the early historical significance and to refer to the town's name in Olelo, Hawaii, most often translated as cruel sun. Like so many other sacred observances, the moment the sun passes directly overhead happens nowhere else in the nominal United States. Lahaina is now lost forever, but this poem sharing the magic of the place remains. Lahaina Noon. Today, I'm a shadowless man. The sun calls me into the street, and I walk alone into the light of noon. The moment has come. I stand quietly on Front Street, balancing the sun on my head. My shadow crawls in my ear to hide in the small dark world of my skull. The sun illuminates the shadow in my skin, and I shine like a second moon, reflecting all the light I cannot contain. Sure Duh was a good friend to Han Shan, also known now as Cold Mountain. And the two guys both wrote poems and wrote a lot of good ones and left them to us. Han Shan the Hermit left more than 300. Sure Duh was a kitchen worker and a janitor at the temple and left around 50. After all, his name does mean pick up. Decades ago, I wished for more poems from Sure Duh. So I picked up a pen and wrote a whole book called Living at the Monastery, Working in the Kitchen. Here's one. Words wind from my mouth as hair winds from my head. Thick, shiny, tough lines of black that dirty with the dust of days, not tangle and fall. The bald monks grimace when they find my poems on walls, on leaves, in mud, on rock, as though seeing a single strand of black in an evening bowl of rice. So surprise and happy birthday. I was born on the 29th birthday of Allen Ginsberg, a fact I cherish and celebrate. When Allen died, I was 41 and Allen was 70. The man's poems mean a lot to me. I wanted to commemorate his death and one truth about poetry that should be simple and obvious to all. Don't blink. This is Death Mask in Red for Allen Ginsberg. Poetry is a stop sign. Either you get it or you don't. Surprisingly few do. After all, how many drivers ever really come to a complete stop? I lived on Okinawa for 8 years teaching English at Ryukyu Daigaku and at the University of Maryland. I've never lived so close to the beach, and I learned many lessons there. Most were corrections to things I already thought I knew. On the verge of the usual mistake, I learned the same thing on the beach again. Between the sea and the land is a broad white span where the surf makes lines, and the lines are blank. On the sand, hermit crabs, broken coral, and wave-worn shells. A cowrie with colors fresh from deeper waters. This is the margin change demands of the world. In the surf, there is a distance before the coral grows, before the fish begin, where there is no rock or green. The empty sand above and below the waves is the space the tides mark for the moon. On the sea's blue edge, nothing grows, nothing rests, nothing that comes here stays here. I love watermelons. Watermelon seeds. Setting the first icy slice on my paper plate, my mother warned me not to swallow watermelon seeds. A vine would sprout from my navel. For the rest of my life, all would ask only about the fruit sprung from beneath my shirt, waiting for my curved, slender sentences as long as the flourishing vine. All I know is this: a tough cord of broad leaves burst from my belly. Flowers folded into fruit and swelled with wet pink flesh, sugar, and light. Every one a world within a smooth, striped rind in a green as deep as summer. Each slick black seed between sticky fingers was as ripe with promise as a period, and all those flat black dots and ever-lengthening ellipses leading to a day, I might speak of the mystery erupting from my guts. All summer, I swallowed every seed. So, love poems, as you all know out there, are hard to write unless you have the right companion. Lucky me. This is another one for Veronica. Matching coffee mugs. At first light, a francolin calls in the field. The cat watches us wake, speaking the moment our eyes open. Windows pale and we rise to start our morning chores. We work together. You feed the cat, I make the coffee. I set our matching mugs on the kitchen counter, your name on one, mine on the other. We shower. You carry spiders in cupped hands to the door and release them in the roses. I follow you and check the papaya tree. One is ripe. In the dawn, the skin is golden. You stand by me and we gaze at the mountain where the sky glows. The sun soon will reach the ridge. Inside, I bring bowls and spoons to the table. You tie the curtains back. A cardinal lights in the Chiave tree. Our eyes open to each other. I slice fruit on the board and you toast the bread. I pour coffee from a brimming pot. You drink from my cup. I drink from yours. So I attended the University of California at Davis, where I was lucky enough to run into Mr. Jordan Jones, my exalted and stellar publisher, just in case you were wondering, the best. And I was finishing up my formal education at that particular time. So one of the things I loved about being there was the confluence of the American and the Sacramento rivers right in the middle of Sacramento, and right off the side, what used to be the west bank of the Sacramento before all of the apartments were built on there for people who are richer than I. Right there, Mr. John Kane, another great friend from California, owned the most excellent houseboat you have ever boarded. And I immediately named it the Damnation. So here's what I learned about the current and permanence from the river. River Eye. When I stood on the deck above the rivers I loved, felt the wheel turn in my hands, and stared down at the shifty, murky, muddy curtain where the Sacramento and the American became one. I was happy to be where I was. I spent days alone on the deck of the Damnation, or drove the California Kid against the current into sunset, watching red-shouldered hawks in cottonwoods overhead. If I did anything right in those days, it was finding the right things to love and loving them till they were gone. The world is no better or worse for me passing through, or for passing through me, bent like the rays sunk in deep water and glimmers of golden motes in the clouds of silt, soil, and mud, stirred by the flow, moving the earth. Everything escapes me now. So I drop a line into the river, catch what I can, drag snapping quicksilver muscle on deck, and stare for a moment into the cold, tilting, silver-rimmed darkness of an alien eye from the river bottom, before I release at last what I never meant to catch and cannot keep. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Eric.
Thank you.
some of those I've read them, of course, for many years, and I've heard you read them, and I've published them a couple times in some cases, and they still get me.
I'm glad to hear it.
Yeah. So next I'm going to bring up Lawrence Millman. Lawrence is a writer, an ethnographer, and mycologist who has made over 40 trips and expeditions to the Arctic and subarctic. His 20 books include such titles as Last Places, Northern Latitudes, A Kayak Full of Ghosts, Our Like Will Not Be There Again, Hiking to Siberia, Lost in the Arctic, At the End of the World, The Book of Origins, and Fungipedia, which is quite a romp. He has written for Smithsonian, National Geographic, Outside, Atlantic Monthly, and the Sunday Times of London. He lives in Cambridge, Massachusetts. I'm personally pleased to have been able to publish his book, Goodbye Ice, Arctic Poems, and to be publishing his forthcoming Outsider, My Boyhood with Thoreau. So without any further words from me, Lawrence Millman.
Thank you, Jordan. I would like to offer you a toast because your comment from your poem, The King Leaves Nurture Wildness, is so utterly true. And I walk up to individuals who are playing around with the absolute worst of all American inventions, the leaf blower. And I say something like that to them, but to no avail. Also, I'd like to toast the poet laureate of Telluride, the eminent Art Goodtimes, and delighted to see his presence here. I'm going to read from Goodbye Ice initially, and then end with a chapter from Outsider, the book that Jordan will be publishing sometime in the spring. This is a poem about my time in the Arctic. I delight in the Arctic more than any other place in the world. One reason being that it has more nature than human beings. And the human beings are spread out far and wide. And many of them are or were very, very traditional. But all of this is changing, as I suggest in my title poem. Goodbye, ice, ancient membrane of the Arctic. Goodbye, shimmering companion who speaks in groans and cracks, roars, shrieks, and silences. You're melting into oblivion. And with your passing, the myriad lives you've blessed, polar bears, seals, and walrus, amphipods grazing on algae, and lipid-rich zooplankton will become homeless forevermore. Jordan mentioned that I'm a mycologist, and I study fungi. Lichens are in the same kingdom as fungi. And here's a little prose poem about lichens. May the gods of the tundra grant me lichen until I become lichen myself. Let me be a rich yellow nitrophlous lichen decorating an Inuit burial cairn. Let me, a foliose lichen, stitch otherwise naked granite into a tapestry. Let me become a map lichen so I can read my own geography. May those gods grant me lichen, any sort of lichen, and I'll live on sunlight, dust motes, and the occasional drop of water, never complaining, never asking for more. Every 100 years, I'll add an inch or two to my character. A millennium later, I'll still lack all presumption and still grasp the rock of my choice with a full-bodied embrace. I have to make a confession. I'm prisoner of war of an academic institution. I even have, and please don't share this with your fellow human beings. I have a doctorate in English literature. I know it's a bit embarrassing, but what can I say? And even when I was in academia, though, my favorite poets were those who were never taught. Robinson Jeffers, Robert Service. I don't know if you've read Robert Service, but I recommend him full-heartedly, the so-called Yukon Bard. And instead, we were obliged in academia to teach individuals like T.S. Eliot and Ezra Pound. I would have rather visited Dog Pound than read Ezra Pound. And this poem, which is actually a description of Herschel Island in the Yukon Territory, sums up what I've more or less said. This is a poem that can't be taught in a walled-off classroom. After all, it doesn't boast a single ambiguity for a teacher to disentangle. Its meaning is just as clear as the sunlit terrain of this high-latitude island. Do not bow to religion or the raging hyenas of capitalism. Bow only to rocks. Bow low to them, for they know how to live. I don't know if you know the bird sandhill crane. I'm not what you would call an ornithologist, but I rank this bird in the upper echelons of all creations. And this took place near Selby Lake, Alaska. Gliding south, a triangular congregation of outstretched necks and echoing bugle calls circles above my head, not once or twice, but 3 times, making me feel more blessed than if a host of winsome angels gracefully flying across the sky anointed me. Near Okak, Labrador. The wind huffs and puffs, it bellows and roars, shouts and shrieks, then huffs and puffs again. But it doesn't blow a house down. After all, there aren't any houses here, only boulders. And if you listen closely, very closely, you might hear one of them say, "How about another kiss, dear wind?" The beach in Igloolik in Nunavut. And this is for a woman named Georgia who was a Catholic nun who moved there and sold all sorts of cookies to the local Inuit in return for seal meat and walrus meat. And she is, I think, alive today in her mid-90s. She hunted seals on occasion herself, by the way. Time-honored Arctic char with honeycomb bodies filled with sand and pebbles. The flotsam bones of birds, their salt-widened eye holes gaping at the wide, wide world. A cream-colored whale's vertebra, broken whelk and limpet shells wrapped in knots of seaweed populate this shingle shore with the delicacy of dismemberment. Okay. And I'll read one more poem and then I'll segue. And I do find, for the most part, mushrooms more interesting than people. And Arctic mushrooms, people say, oh, you're going to the Arctic, too bad, there aren't any mushrooms. That isn't at all true. Some of the tundras I've been on are so covered with mushrooms that if I were a slightly lighter weight person, I feel I could have walked right along the tundra on top of them for a considerable distance. All praise the mighty Lexinum, a scaber-stalked mushroom that readily spreads its spores in a habitat so windblown and likewise so frigid that if a redwood, seemingly mighty itself, somehow found itself here, it might bawl these words: California, where art thou? Now a segue to my memoir called Outsider, My Boyhood with Thoreau. And in it, I describe myself as an outsider, not only because I vastly prefer the out of doors to the indoors, but also because I seem to be outside any known social group. And I will now read the opening of this. I'm not going to read the part of it where I discuss my discovery of Thoreau, which resulted in an epiphany for me, and how I ended up camping in the backyard of our 1 acre house in Kansas City, Missouri, which is where I grew up, unless you think otherwise. A very civilized place. Calvin Trillin, Evan Cannell, Virgil Thompson, among other people, William Least Heat Moon, all of whom came from there. And I often think, yes, well, maybe one of the virtues of a place like that, or for me, an outsider, an outdoors person living in an urban place, is it inspires me to react against it. And that, in turn, inspires writing. Just as some of the best Russian writing occurred during the Soviet period and continued, barely veiled criticisms of a gentleman named Stalin. Even when I was just an army of embryonic cells multiplying inside her, my mother rejected me. To one of her friends, she sent a letter in which she asked, "What did I do to deserve this?" This was, of course, me. Having what might be called a social distancing gene, I've always tried to remain apart from members of my species. A lady friend of mine once asked my mother what I was like as a little boy. He hated crowds, my mother said, adding, for him, a crowd was more than one person. Sometimes one person would be one too many. In grade school, a boy who wanted to be my playmate kept me toy soldiers of all shapes, sizes, and colors on my desk. I got so tired of these attempts to buy my friendship that I put a bag of dog crap on his desk, telling him that if he didn't stop bothering me, next time it would be a bag of elephant or hippopotamus. I don't exactly remember crap. If my fellow students and their teachers happened to be singing My Country 'Tis of Thee, America the Beautiful, or Row, Row, Row Your Boat in the auditorium, I would make every effort to hide out in some dark corner of the school or in a bathroom so I wouldn't be part of the crowd, the noisy crowd. Other boys like to beat up each other, hoping that they would be regarded as, what an honor, a school bully. Not me, for if you want to beat someone up, you have to get quite close to them. And I was distant rather than close to my classmates. Unlike most kids, I didn't go through a dinosaur phase. That's because I needed to see or touch an animal rather than play with a plastic version of it. Nor did I go through a Disney phase. Mickey Mouse, even a dead mouse interested me more. Although I distanced myself from Mickey Mouse and his fellow cartoon characters, as well as most of my schoolmates, I got up close and personal with snails, snakes, earthworms, slugs, spiders, frogs, centipedes, millipedes, salamanders, pill bugs, toads, caterpillars, and leeches. If something creeped, crawled, or slithered, I figured it would be better company than one of my schoolmates. My mentor-to-be, Henry David Thoreau, wrote, "It appears to be a law that you can't have a deep sympathy with both man and nature. Those qualities that bring you near to one, estrange from the other. Estranged from man, woman too, I seem to have obeyed that law." An abnormal lack of level of the hormone oxytocin repeatedly makes children less empathetic. But empathetic toward what? I had a high degree of empathy toward earthworms, which were considered ecological warriors rather than ecological marauders at that time. I would hang out with them in my family's backyard, and with my youthful taxonomic skills, give them names based on my favorite drinks. The lightest ones were vanilla milkshakes, darker ones were chocolate milkshakes, and the darkest ones were chocolate malts. Our next door neighbor gave me brownies every time I showed up at her door. When I learned that she was moving somewhere else, I gave her a jar of earthworms as a going away present. Knowing how much I liked earthworms, she burst into tears when she looked at what was in the jar. I spent a goodly portion of my time in the company of ground-dwelling critters in my family's backyard. Often, I ended up looking as if my home, like their homes, was the dirt. On one such occasion, when I was covered with more dirt than usual, my father said, "You're the dirtiest little boy in the world." These words made my youthful chest swell with pride. And I should add that when I finished my Walden retreat in my backyard and came into the house, my father said to me, instead of "You're the dirtiest little boy in the world," he said, "You're a dirty little Thoreau." Okay, I think that's about it for the time being.
Thank you, Lawrence and Eric.
Thank
and
you.
Jordan.
Appreciate
Oh,
it.
Yeah, if everybody wants to unmute for a second, just have a round of applause, we could for our authors.
Thank you, everybody.
Yeah.
I love all the dirt poems.
Yeah, wonderful. And Eric's watermelon poem. Wow. So one of the great things about Zoom is that that we hear people from all over, from Hawaii and from Massachusetts and vicariously from Alaska and so forth. So it's really wonderful to have this illumination that comes from this otherwise obnoxious technology. And anyway, so thank you all, and so happy to have Coyote Press nearby now in Albuquerque. So yeah, so we're going to take just a few minutes. We're running a little late, but we'll take a few minutes for questions or comments.
Type something in the chat too, if you like.
You like? Mm-hmm. whatever. Mhm.
And do keep us posted on future readings, and the Coyote Arts website is on the chat. Jordan, do you want to say your website again? And you have on all your book links?
Yeah, so it's coyote-arts.com.
Mhm.
And all the books that are current are listed, linked from the homepage. So if you get there, you'll find it.
And I always say the best way to support poets is to buy their books.
To buy their books, yeah.
Indeed.
I also wanted to give a shout out to Marjorie St. Clair in Hawaii.
Hi, Marjorie.
On Oahu. So yeah, and Kate Wedgerson from up in Colorado. So yeah. Any other thoughts, questions? Wonderful readings and real exciting. Bruce holds that leg. Bruce. Good.
Great. Well, I'm gonna wrap it and we'll do our open mic, but it's so great with the Zoom technology to the necessary evil to bring us all together.
Could I interrupt here for a moment?
Sure. Go
Yeah.
ahead.
Eric and I met years ago on a really sort of a nasty poetry site called Poem Hunters.
Yeah.
It was really awful, but he was great. So I've known him for a long time, well, 4 or 5 years now, and he's been really
Everyone forward back to Millman.
great supporter, good poet. So I'm just glad that this awful technology has sort of allowed me to connect with somebody.
And great to see Jefferson from Arizona. Good to see you.
Thank you, Jefferson. Good to see you, man.
Mhm.
I wish you'd come visit.
I intend to get to the Southwest as soon as I retire.
All right.
207 more days.
All right.
Okay.
Good.
You're doing one more year, right? One more year of teaching. Yeah. Okay.
That was the best group of men I have ever heard. Whether I was out playing in the
The way
swamp,
she punctuated
the
men.
woods, as a child. I mean, you guys were the best group. I think you should do something often together.
Yeah,
In
take it on the
poetry.
road. Mhm.
So you're
Read-
telling us to
yes.
go out on the road now, right?
Yes, you give inspiration to us gals that are kind of wondering about what are you guys all doing?
We can play poker. We can have really great poker games.
There you go,
Cigars.
sure. And Cambridge would be a great place to meet.
Well,
Or Albuquerque.
anytime they come through, we'll be featuring at the back porch
That's right.
in the
Nice.
summer. So
Nice.
you never know.
Millman, do you go out to the ponds west of Cambridge? I can't remember all the names. There's Walden Pond and then lots of small ones out there.
Oh, absolutely. Going out to Walden tomorrow and White Pond, which Thoreau wrote about. I was
White
there on
Pond.
Sunday. And, I shuffle back and forth. I don't own a 2-ton wheelchair. That's otherwise known as an automobile. And so I don't end up sealing myself off from the rest of the world. But I do whenever possible, I use something that's rapidly becoming vestigial, known as feet. And I go walk all these ponds, yes. I wander around, and even in the winter we'll go swimming in. Because I'm a person who delights in the cold. And
Wonderful.
right now in my apartment, there's no heat and the temperature is about 55. In some parts of the desert Southwest, the mere mention of that temperature might give people hypothermia, but I love it.
Yeah, depends on where you are in the desert Southwest. They're quite used to the
Yeah, we've got a
those
lot
temps
of
and
snow.
worse in Taos.
It wasn't really.
It was
wasn't
20.
that
It was
bad.
20 degrees this morning in Placitas. So yeah.
The
Well,
summer-
for us in Colorado, I was dog sitting, pet sitting, house, and you walk the dog, but it was 6 degrees in the morning. And it got up to 9 degrees. So my poetry started to read things like, I hope the city has made plans for sheltering people. It's only up to 9 degrees. So
I have just finished an article for something called the Explorer's Web on a critter known as the Arctic woolly bear caterpillar. Now, you may know the temperate woolly bear caterpillar, but the Arctic woolly bear caterpillar can deal with temperatures of -75 degrees below zero. It lives for 14 years. It eats and purposefully freezes. It undergoes what's called voluntary hypothermia, then thaws out back again 14 years, and then it turns into a moth that goes mating and has a life expectancy of a week. And I argue that this caterpillar has far more survival skills than most members of my own species.
And on that note, thank you for everybody.
Wonderful.